NATO Secretary General has visited Ukraine for the first time. His message to the Ukrainian president: NATO stands with Ukraine. The Ukrainian president message: give us more weapons like long-range missiles and make us a NATO member. Well, NATO has responded, we'll consider with these requests. Why is NATO, led by the U.S., not providing Ukraine with the lethal weapons that it needs? Is it afraid of being dragged into a nuclear war with Russia, or does it have a sinister plot of dragging out the war? Just a few of the questions we'll be asking our guests in this edition of The Spotlight. First, let me introduce them. Olena Tregub, Millennium Fellow at the Atlantic Council and political commentator, joins us from Kiev. Also joining us, Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine intelligence officer, who joins us from Bethlehem, New York. Welcome to you both. Olena Tregub, let me first start with you, if I may. Well, it looks like we don't have her. Scott Ritter, I'll start with you. I'd like to do some role-playing here, if I may, even though this is a very serious subject, because I'm trying to understand what's going on when it comes to this war. You have the NATO Secretary General who's in Ukraine, and he says to Zelensky, quote, "Mr. President, I'm here today with a simple message. NATO stands with Ukraine." He says, NATO stands with you today, tomorrow, and for long as it takes. So you have the Ukrainian President, Zelensky, who says, give us long-range artillery and armored vehicles. And then NATO, and through Jens Stoltenberg, says, we'll think about it. Why do you think NATO is taking that stance when it comes to providing military equipment to Ukraine?
There's two aspects of it. One, long-range missiles are an inherently destabilizing factor in the war. NATO has made it clear, together with the United States, that their goal is the defeat of Russia, but determining what constitutes the defeat of Russia might be calculated differently in Ukraine than in Brussels, for instance. For the United States, we know that, according to Lloyd Austin, a Russian defeat involves bringing them pain. So much pain that Russia will never again seek to carry out the kind of attack on Ukraine that it has. The Ukrainian definition of victory is, or a Russian defeat, is to evict Russia from the 4 territories that they annexed last year and Crimea. For Ukraine, they believe they need these long-range missiles to inflict damage on Russia's command and control, logistics, ammunition, and also to disrupt the morale of the Russian people, to break the will of the Russian people to continue this fight. NATO sees this Ukrainian goal as perhaps creating what would be called an existential threat to Russia, thereby triggering Russia's nuclear deterrent doctrine, which states clearly that if a conventional military capability is brought to bear on Russia that represents an existential threat, that Russia could use its nuclear weapons. So there's two competing definitions of what victory is. Therefore, there's two competing equipment sets that can apply. NATO wants to give Ukraine sufficient weaponry to sustain the battle in order to bring pain to Russia. Ukraine wants to acquire weaponry necessary to defeat Russia and evict Russia from territories that they consider to be theirs.
Okay, let me reintroduce Olena Tregub, if she is with us, Millennium Fellow at the Atlantic Council and political commentator from Kiev. Olena Tregub, welcome to the program. The first question that I asked our guest Scott, Olena Tregub, you have my voice.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. The question that I asked our guest there, which I'm going to continue with you, is the military support that President Zelensky is not getting, the types of equipment that he wants. There's resistance in terms of the types of equipment that he wants, long-range missiles, for example, or also armored vehicles in the soundbite that we heard from him today when Jens Stoltenberg visited Ukraine for the first time. There's also a request for NATO membership, which Jens Stoltenberg said, we'll discuss that in the summit. Prior to that, the EU membership request by Ukraine is not also something that has been welcomed as of yet, even though the reception is positive. Why do you think there's resistance on these fronts when it comes to Ukraine and its request?
Well, I think that there is not enough courage, unfortunately, that is demonstrated by the leading country of NATO, United States. and also the European Union. It's the basically political will. It's very simple. Russian nuclear threats, they are effective. If not for Russian nuclear blackmail, in my opinion, Ukraine would have received much more military assistance by now. We would have received what we need to throw Russia out of Ukrainian territory. Instead, the West is using this incremental approach when they give us bit by bit, and when there is resistance on everything that we are asking for, and then later on they are giving us what we ask for. But President Zelensky said, and in Ukraine everybody understands what he said. He said that the time that we were waiting for this assistance, for this particular weapon that we asked for, is the time that we were paying with lives of Ukrainian soldiers, of Ukrainian people. And this is what we are talking about here, that Ukraine is bleeding right now. Even though our victory is inevitable, it comes at a very, very high cost to Ukraine as a result of those policies.
Okay. Scott Ritter, it's interesting that she said Ukraine is bleeding right now, but they're going to eventually be successful. Well, we had the leaked Pentagon files, if there's any validity to it, which appears to be, where it says Ukraine's Air Force may soon collapse. Ukraine's air defense faces serious challenges in the upcoming months, and if Ukraine continues at the current consumption rates, it will have completely depleted a stock of Buk missiles by April 13, and of the S-300 missiles by May 3. It's not painting a pretty picture about Ukraine's military capabilities at this point. How alarming is these leaks of the Pentagon files, if you agree with what has been leaked?
Well, I mean,
this for Scott Ritter. I'm sorry. I'll come back to you with the same thing. Olena, go ahead, Scott Ritter.
The information contained in the leaks is information that that could be ascertained simply by paying attention to public statements made by both the United States, NATO, and indeed the Ukrainians themselves. I mean, there's a reason why President Zelensky said, if I don't receive M1 tanks by August, it's too late. It means the war is over by August. The concept of the inevitability of Ukrainian victory, while I compliment the fighting spirit of the Ukrainians, is not reflected by the reality of the situation. As we speak right now, their air defense in the forward areas is non-existent. The Russians are slaughtering Ukrainians in unthinkable numbers. The ability of the Ukrainian Air Force to have a meaningful impact on the battlefield is nil. They're losing troops at a faster rate than they can replenish them, and this all bodes ill for Ukraine. Again, I'm not denigrating the will of the Ukrainian people or the fighting spirit of their military, but reality is reality, and right now the reality is that on the current trajectory, Ukraine loses this war by the end of summer, early fall.
Okay, so Olena, along with the leaked files that have been released, one of the other revelations, it says that by May, that's in about less than a few weeks, couple weeks, most of Ukraine's critical national infrastructure outside of Kiev and two other areas in southwestern Ukraine will no longer have air defense cover, with the number of unprotected critical sites jumping from 6 to more than 40. So Ukraine is reaching that, as our guest there, Scott Ritter said, a point where it may be a point of no return as of August, based on what President Zelensky has said. If we're looking at that situation, if you agree that Ukraine is in that situation, then why isn't the military support being given so that doesn't happen? And why is it being given in this drips and drabs by the U.S.-led NATO?
Well, first of all, I would like to remind you that the leaked information, first of all, many officials said that part of the information is not true, is not authentic. We don't know what's true, what's not true. We have to remember that we're not confident all of it is authentic. Second of all, I want to remind you that it's outdated. Why do you think some remedies were not introduced since those critical reports were made? we have strengthened our capabilities since then, since the time of when these reports were submitted, the leaked information. And yes, of course, it's true that right now the capital of Ukraine, Kiev, is very well protected in terms of air defense. But the regions of Ukraine that are not protected are the ones near the front lines in the north and south of Ukraine, mostly. So yes, it's an issue. It's a critical issue, and Russians have manufactured these aerial bombs that are now effectively using against Ukraine, and Ukraine needs much stronger air defense. Ukraine needs not only ground-based air defense, because it's absolutely not enough. Ukraine needs a complex solution which includes fighter jets such as F-16s. And then, with such political decision, we now already have pilots who are trained to fly F-16s. We will talk about, strengthening Ukrainian air defense. And yes, again, we're talking about lack of, unfortunately, political will, because there are 4,000 F-16s in the world, and Ukraine is only asking for 1% of it. Only like 40 would make a difference for this critical air protection that you mentioned.
Okay, Scott Ritter, there has been a push by Russia, again, to expand its war recruitment and to absorb some soldiers and, I guess, spread it out on the battlefield. Coming at this time, and based on what you have said, do you think that this means the war is going to continue, or is it that Russia wants to prepare for a major offensive?
I believe any Russian offensive that'll take place is going to take place with resources that already exist, meaning these are the mobilized troops that began mobilization in September of last year and have either completed their training or finishing their training at this point in time. What we're seeing right now in terms of recruitment for Russia is reflective of a separate but related issue of expanding the Russian military from 900,000 to 1.5 million to take into account the expansion of NATO, the introduction of Finland into NATO, tensions in the Pacific, tensions in the Arctic. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, has said that they will expand the military, and the majority of these will be contract soldiers. So we see a heavy recruitment right now for contract troops, but these troops, this recruitment effort has no linkage whatsoever with any prospective Russian military offensive in the special military operations zone of operations. That'll take place with the resources Russia already has available.
Okay. Olena, if we want to take a look at the way that there are unfortunate, obviously, deaths that are occurring on the battlefield, do you think that that outweighs the push that Zelensky has in his desire to want to defeat Russia? Do you think that it's worth the push that he's making, I'm trying to put things into perspective here when it comes to not only the damage that Ukraine is receiving in its territory, but the military deaths. For example, you have, as an example, China's 12-point peace plan, which Zelensky was somewhat warming up to. I'm not too sure where that stands. Is this something that Zelensky considers by having this war continue when it comes to the deaths, the civilian deaths also, aside from the military deaths?
Oh, well, I cannot agree with you that Zelensky is pushing for something. Actually, he's not. Look, we don't have counteroffensive right now. We have postponed it because we said, sorry, we did not receive enough weapons for it, and we do not want to pay with the lives of our people to, fill the gap of those missing weapons. So, no, we are now, it's a so-called position war where we are holding our ground, but Ukrainian population expects from Ukrainian government that they will be able to take back Ukrainian land. Like, I'm now in Kiev, I talk to every taxi driver here, and I tell you, the pressure comes from Ukrainian people, not from Zelensky. Ukraine is a democracy, and therefore Zelensky, he has to serve the public interest. And if Zelensky, for example, concedes to some plan which Ukrainian population considers as a betrayal for example, in Chinese plan, if like the plan is to give away Ukrainian territory, we will have probably another president. And therefore, it's a very complex situation here because Ukraine is a democracy; it's not authoritarian state.
I understand that, but if you're not getting the equipment and you're not able to defeat Russia, then the continuation would equal unfortunately, more civilian deaths and military deaths. So is that worth the risk taking at this point? You have admitted that you're not getting the type of military support that is required in order to defeat Russia.
Well, yes, but we now have expectations that maybe there will be in July NATO summit in Vilnius in Lithuania. Maybe during this summit there will be some major steps taken. Maybe it will be announced that we will receive fighter jets that we need, the modern generation, not MiGs. People in Ukraine, the way they see the war right now, they don't see that it's not worth the sacrifice, because it's not about land only. People understand that this war, it's a genocidal war of Russia, where they are trying to destroy our whole nation, 40 million nation. And Ukrainian people, they watch Russian Telegram channels, Russian TV, and what you hear there is genocidal language. They don't say, let's occupy and take a piece of Ukraine. This is not what Russians want. Russians say, let's destroy Ukraine as a nation, let's destroy this whole state. And if Ukrainians are facing this existential threat, then they are ready to tolerate and stand much longer than you would expect in other scenarios.
Okay, so Scott Ritter, since we're winding down here, what do you think? I mean, it seems like this war is coming to somewhat of maybe a turning point in terms of where it's going to go. Ukraine's not getting the equipment it wants. Russia's hiring or recruiting more soldiers, or I guess people to go out and fight. And at the same time, if Russia continues with its military advancements, then it might obviously, I don't want to say defeat Ukraine, but it might penetrate further into Ukraine. Are we looking at a turning point here when it comes to the way that things are going? Our guest there from Kiev says that, well, we have to wait till August to see what NATO is going to do and if they're going to get provided with the military equipment. Can't Ukraine withstand this period of time until August?
Well, I mean, first of all, again, we have to acknowledge the resilience of Ukraine as a nation and their military. They've been subjected to a tremendous amount of damage, and they're still fighting. So right off the bat, you can't discount that factor. But reality is reality. And as President Zelensky said, if he doesn't receive equipment by August, it's too late. And waiting for the July NATO summit is too late. NATO, even if a decision was made in July, wouldn't get the equipment to Ukraine by August. I think we're looking at a situation that if Russia is able to perform to its potential, that the Ukrainian military will face collapse. They just simply can't sustain the level of casualties. They can't sustain the level of damage being done without sufficient replenishment and reinforcement, which is not forthcoming at this point in time. And the Ukrainian people, again, tremendous resilience in the face of adversity, but the damage being done to the infrastructure, combined with the potential for a decisive defeat of their military on the battlefield, nations have collapsed and lost the political will to continue struggling under these conditions. I'm not saying that that's Ukraine's future. I'm saying that history shows that that's what happens when your military is decisively defeated on the battlefield. And if something doesn't happen to change the current equation, Russia is in the process of defeating the Ukrainian military decisively on the battlefield.
Olena Tregub, last question to you. Are there any plans for a defeat by Ukraine? Are they preparing in any sense that you may be aware of? Because as our guest there said, reality may sink in. I'm not saying that it will, that if Ukraine doesn't get that support, that this may spell a defeat for it. Are you and the government of Ukraine ready for that?
No, absolutely. Ukraine is not preparing for that, and Ukraine already showed sort of a phenomenon in terms of how we are able to resist, even if we don't have enough weapons. Here in Ukraine, people are absolutely optimistic. Over 90% of Ukrainians believe in victory.
Okay.
They are not preparing for defeat.
Okay, very well. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But thank you, Olena Tregub, Millennium Fellow, Atlantic Council, and political commentator from Kiev. Thank you so much. Scott Ritter, pleasure, former U.S. Marine Intelligence Officer from Bethlehem, New York. With that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight from Miko Matagway and the team. Let's goodbye.